Hello, everyone, and welcome to Draft Day. That's right. It is me doing the intro, one of your co-hosts, Jason Bradshaw, and joining me, just as always, is the other host of Draft Day, Mr. John Fleming. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. This role reversal on the intros is interesting, but honestly, kind of soothing to me. I don't know why.
I mean, I figure all the time people get to hear how things are going with me, and I'm like, let's let John be the one that people get to hear. Usually, the yours is the I'm good. Usually, it's me being like, I'm tired because I have small children. Blah blah blah. Whatever.
Yeah, my answer is gonna be I'm good. Pretty like I definitely am one of those people that like no matter what's going on, the answer is I'm good. I could have gotten like a $50,000 raise at work. I could have like had a heart attack on the way home from work, and be like I'm good. No.
Yeah, I mean that's either good or bad. I guess I mean you're better than the attendance at Busch Stadium. So
It doesn't seem like a particularly linear analogy, but
well, no, Busch Stadium is more circular in nature. Um, maybe more pentagonal.
yeah, I'm not sure how you would describe the shape. I guess it's like broadly a circle, like the perimeter of it, but like it's not like the old Bush Stadium where it like literally like you
Was a
look at it from
circle.
above, it's just straight up a circle. Yeah,
Yeah, that's why I was trying to like figure it out, but I don't know. But no, I'm glad that you're doing well. I think we got a an interesting, slightly different take on a draft to do tonight, a conventional-ish, I guess we'd say.
yeah. I mean, this is definitely different than some of our other sports drafts. It's probably a little bit more conventional than drafting the hottest presidents, for instance. But it's
Yeah, that
good to
was
shake up the formula a little bit.
yeah, it feels good to get back to just a little two-man game. Going to be a shorter draft today, only doing an NBA. Well, I guess we can just say we're doing the 1986 NBA draft, but only the lottery, which was 8 teams.
Yeah,
Um, but before we kind of
I'm
jump into
actually
that, you have any hypotheticals or any trivia that you've prepared this week? I haven't prepared any because it's
so.
already past my
I,
bedtime as we're recording. So
So I don't have any trivia. I do have a hypothetical I want to pose to you, but I think we need to introduce the kind of what's differing about this episode compared to other episodes before we jump into it. Do you want to explain kind of how we're differing from normal, or do you want me
yeah,
to
I could
explain it?
I could take a stab at it here, and this will also be funny because John and I literally, for anyone listening to this, we made this decision I'd say less than 12 hours ago. So the amount of research and everything we've done has been fairly quick in the turnaround on this one. But the idea of this one is we're drafting the lottery, but we're not drafting it as, hey, just take the best player. Which, to be fair, there's not. If we were doing that, this is one of those drafts where I feel like you can make arguments for a few different guys at number one, not a clear number one. But we're going to be drafting it as if we were the GM who is making the pick in the lottery. I feel like this is sort of inspired by John's like playing of historic 2K, where he's created a team and just gone into drafts, knowing
That's
who the
that's
players are.
partially that's partially it, though I will say part of it's just inspired by the nature of this particular draft class because this is maybe more than any other draft we've done, a draft of like what ifs and a lot of like situational kind of drafting involved. This is, I mean, I'll just say the elephant in the room is that this is the draft where the number two overall pick, Len Bias, died of cocaine use within 48 hours of the draft. A couple other prominent high draft picks also had their careers derailed by drug use. This was the draft that Drazen Petrovic was in, who was really off to a hot start in his career before he tragically passed away in a car accident. And I think that this is also a draft where there's like a clear winner and a clear loser of the draft in terms of the teams involved because and we can probably discuss this a little bit more once we actually start making the picks too, but like the Cleveland Cavaliers went from being just an awful team to being, never a team that like got over the hump until the second LeBron run, but like
Right.
became a viable team basically on the strength of two of their lottery picks plus another guy who wasn't a
Yeah.
lottery pick but is probably going to be a lottery pick in our redraft that they traded for not within a year of the draft.
Yeah.
And the Boston Celtics, who were coming off of you know the best team of of that dynasty, and a team that I think probably one of the top 5 NBA teams of all time conservatively, the 85-86 Celtics, and yet they
They're
still
awfully
managed
good.
to have the number yeah, they still managed to have the number 2 overall pick, and there was kind of this feeling of like they're going to be able to pick a guy that extends this run because some of the guys are getting a little bit older, but then of
Right.
course, with Len Bias passing and then under different circumstances, but the passing of Reggie Lewis was it 7 years later, I think, really kind of derailed the franchise. I mean, they were still good for a few more years after this, but I mean, honestly, you can make a case that they were never really the same. They didn't win another title until 2008, and obviously, all these guys were long gone from the team by then.
Yeah, it's a weird one to look at. It's like, oh yeah, the Boston Celtics such big losers in the draft, but it's not because the pick was bad on its surface. Like I said, it's a giant what if.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
it's one of those things where, and there's probably some of this is changed by hindsight because people don't want to say anything other than glowing things about somebody who passed away so young. But I think people are generally of the belief of, oh, this guy was like a surefire can't miss. Not necessarily that he was going to be like the next Jordan or whatever, but like this idea of like worst case scenario, this guy's going to be a really strong contributor for this dynasty that's ongoing. And obviously that didn't end up happening. But
right?
I think because of the circumstances they were in, and because of the circumstances some of these other teams were in, it does make for kind of an interesting, you know, choice as far as who to pick. Because, like you said, there's not really like a clear cut number one pick in this draft, but there are like a pretty good number of like number 3 or number 4 picks. Like there's a decent depth of like good contributing players. These aren't necessarily going for like the super high end guys.
Yeah, it's a weird thing where maybe some of the higher end, if you want to call them guys, outside of a couple, didn't necessarily play super long. Obviously, not just being Petrovic with the tragic car accident, but like even a guy like the number one overall pick here, who may make it in or not, but Brad Doherty be the number one overall pick. He didn't play a super long time. Like he only played 8 seasons.
Yeah.
Like,
And he was effective during those seasons, but it definitely was not a long run. And
yeah, I
you
mean, I
know,
believe he averaged the most points per game of anyone in this draft in the NBA at 19 a game.
yeah.
So,
Well, it's kind of a weird draft too because there's 3 Hall of Famers in this draft. 2 of them are Petrovic and Arvydas Sabonis, who were both good NBA players, but were largely inducted on the strength of their international career as well as their time playing professionally in Europe. And then Dennis Rodman, who is a much more idiosyncratic Hall of Famer because like there are not many players in the Hall of Fame, like maybe Ben Wallace, who's like more one dimensional than he is. It's not like you're drafting a guy that you're going to build your entire franchise around. Like there's a reason he was on some very good teams, but he was never the guy on those teams.
yeah, but I think, he was the definition, I would say, of a role player. And like him, like I said, Ben Wallace is the only guy that like comes to my mind that's like exceedingly like good. And he was maybe in an era where that type of player just, I think maybe even, not to be the guy that's like, well, the NBA now, but he was a defensive and rebounding guy in a time where, you know, your stars, weren't always necessarily, doing that type of thing. Not that they were bad defenders, but they weren't doing it how Rodman did it. I mean, obviously his personality beyond the court is, I mean, we could do an entire podcast of just like
Yeah,
that, but
we could draft Rodman things. It would not be that Madonna versus Carmen Electra number 1 pick is going to be a real
I mean,
real battle. But
So
yeah,
yeah,
the thing with with a guy like Rodman though is I actually kind of wonder, and I'm sure Rodman will come up in this draft, but like what how you evaluate a guy like that in a modern context because like on one hand, like even though he was not super tall, like you'd almost have to play Dennis Rodman in the modern NBA as like a center just because like it's hard enough to find a center in the NBA that can't spot up from three a little bit, but like you
yeah,
definitely have to at least have some sort of exterior game if you're playing 1 through 4.
exactly. It's yeah. I mean, there's some big guys in this draft that when you look at like their 3-point statistics, it's pretty hilarious. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, and I think that with our drafting, we're kind of looking at the eras in which they're playing, and you actually have like a few guys who are like really like the best 3-point shooters of their era in this draft, but then you have guys who are like maybe not Dennis Rodman, but are you're not expecting. Like for instance, Arvydas Sabonis, famously his son Demontis is in the NBA, and like he's not what I would call a 3-point shooter. He is a center, but like
No,
he can hold his own there,
sure,
whereas some other guys could not. And there's
right.
another a father of a quite good 3-point shooter in this draft as well. But we'll
Well, yeah,
see if he comes up.
yeah, be interesting. I don't. And here's the thing. I'll be completely honest. We before anybody freaks out, we did switch 2 of the picks just so I could only have to research one team, and that was Cleveland.
Yeah. Well, it's also partially just because it would be a little bit weird if. And so, for the most part, Jason's going to be taking the odds. I'll be taking the evens, except that I'll be drafting number 7 and he'll be drafting number 8. Because otherwise, I'd be drafting a player building off of the pick that he already made. And it just, I think, makes more sense that we're going to, like, kind of play as the GMs, but, I'll play as 4 different GMs, you'll play as 3. It's not like we're splitting duty on anybody.
Right. But yeah, all that out there, I don't know. So we haven't even gotten your hypothetical yet, have we? Or did we? I don't think we did.
Oh, we have not. We have not gotten the hypothetical. This is actually a pretty quick one, and honestly, I think I know what your answer is, but this is actually kind of an extension of from our 1984 discussion. So we discussed kind of the whole Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan thing with the Portland Trail Blazers. And a big part of the defense of drafting Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan is that the Trailblazers already had Clyde Drexler.
Sure.
And have and it's obviously a really good shooting guard. It's a Hall of Famer. It's a member of the Dream Team, but he's not Jordan.
Oh
But
yeah. No.
what if, for whatever reason, the Houston Rockets, instead of drafting Hakeem Olajuwon #1, drafted Sam Bowie #1? So with Portland, and this is knowing what you know now, because I think that if this had happened in real life, they're drafting Hakeem Olajuwon. It's not even close. But if
Yeah.
they're in a situation where they have a bigger need for a center is available who was teammates with their star player in college,
Yeah.
and their star player also plays the same position and has a similar, if not quite as effective game to the other guy who's considered like a consensus pick who
Hmm.
is Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that I was thinking about when it came down to this exercise because, like, for instance, you're going to be drafting somebody with Cleveland with the #1 pick, and then you're going to be thinking when you're drafting at #8 who's going to gel well with this player. You're not necessarily going to draft like if you draft like a 7-footer at #1, you're probably not going to draft a 7-footer at #8 as well, unless you just think you're getting totally amazing value.
Right. I mean, so the question is, knowing what I know now, who do I take?
Yeah, do you take Hakeem or do you take Jordan?
So here's the thing. I agree with you when you say, there's a lot of things that, especially at the time. would have been Hakeem, no doubt. If Sam Bowie going first. But in retrospect, like if you had the chance to draft Michael Jordan, you draft Michael Jordan.
I
You can
th-
either trade Drexler for somebody else, or one of them can play the three or the point.
yeah,
You know,
I think you're right. I am not 100% sure, but I do think you're right because I think that there would be something to Olajuwon and Drexler teaming up, and I know that they played on the '95 Rockets together, but that was for a short period of time. That was when both of them, but especially Drexler, were past their absolute peak, and they
sure.
had other guys carrying it too. I mean, I think that certainly the Rockets would be in a much better situation if they drafted Olajuwon than if they drafted Bowie, but I just wanted to kind of just throw that out there as like a little bit of a warm up to what we're about to do. We don't have
Yeah,
to
it's
dig
an
too far
interesting
into it.
hypothetical. I think that it's interesting looking at these teams and like looking at need and stuff. That there's some very clear people who shot to the top of lists for me, but I don't know. This will be a fun one, I think.
Right. You though, as the Cleveland Cavaliers have the number one overall pick.
We do.
As we mentioned, they selected Brad Doherty, number one, who had a good NBA career, but it
Yeah.
was fairly short. He only played 8 seasons, though. Five-time All-Star. Somehow went on to become a NASCAR analyst for ESPN, which is completely wild. But
Yeah. Ate lunch next to my wife and my in-laws when they were actually in Kansas City for one of the races. They were going to the race, and I was actually in San Diego with you when that happened,
oh,
and some of our friends. But she rubbed it in my face that she got to see the Gin Blossoms playing as the pre-race show, um, which I sent her a picture of the beach, and I think I won. But
probably.
I do
I
like
guess
the
it
Gin
depends
Blossoms
how.
for the record. But
Yeah, I think they're fine. I mean, I would not be opposed to seeing them, but yeah, San Diego is a pretty elite beach city, so
yeah, it was it was a good time. But all that to stall and say, and so as I looked at kind of the Cleveland Cavaliers needs, like you said, like they didn't finish as the worst team in the NBA that year, record wise. They might have been second worst, I think, from what I was looking at. But to win the lottery still and everything, and but when you look at it, they like their record was almost like they should have been better than their record when you kind of just break down the team statistics on a per game basis and such. No glaring things. They're 19th in points per game, 11th in points allowed per game, 15th in field goal percentage, 6th in field goal percentage allowed. I mean,
yeah, I mean
14th in
defensively they sound
rebounding.
pretty solid.
Yeah,
Offensively,
offense they need a
not
little bit.
horrible, but that's definitely weaker.
Yeah, but a spot where they struggle maybe a little bit was in 3-point shooting and stuff. So I actually just defer to the analytics and stuff here. Went with the guy at the highest score actually in this one as the number one pick. Never thought I'd be saying this in my life, but with the first overall pick, Jeff Hornacek.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
So I admittedly did not look too deep into the Cavs roster. They still had World Be Free at this point, right?
yeah, they still had, but
Okay. So I mean, you could play him and Hornacek together as kind of
yeah,
co-wings, probably.
and it's more of just the like when I make the assumption, I make the assumption that their career stats are all going to be with this team. you know, when you draft. Because I think if I go, oh, well, if I'm going to draft a guy, because like honestly, Doherty may be the pick if you're just like, oh, yeah, it's fine if he sticks around for 5, 6 years and we trade him or he retires or whatever. He very
Yeah.
well could be the guy that they need from an offensive perspective. But, this Hornacek's a guy who in this draft class, like most minutes played, most points scored, um, you know, decent numbers, um, career 40% from three for his career. Um,
Yeah, he's definitely a guy that would have made more sense in a more modern era.
yeah, he was sort of like I like he's like the one of the first guys that I really remember. Just like, oh yeah, that guy is the white guy that shoots threes. Like when I was a kid growing up, that was maybe more like the name that'll always be in my head is Peja Stojakovic when I was a kid. Um, just watching those Kings teams, which
Yeah,
admittedly,
I mean,
like as an adult, he was probably better at other things than just shooting threes.
yeah.
But
Yeah, I would say that Hornacek was, I wouldn't call him one dimensional, but I would say that he was a little more on the 3-point shooting, if that was his game, than and Peja, who obviously was good at it, but he could do other things quite
yeah,
well.
but I mean, a guy who, I mean, the other thing too is, if you're looking at for just pure value here, Hornacek taken at 46 in this draft by Phoenix. Um, but then I think he
Yeah,
played
and
there for a decent while. Like I guess as a kid, I remember more at the end of his career, probably with Utah.
sure,
But
yeah.
given that
Yeah, he
I
played
was
with
I was negative
played with
4 years
Phoenix.
old when this draft happened, so
Yeah, played a year or two in Philly as well, and was the key piece of the Charles Barkley trade. So,
yeah,
if this pick doesn't work out for the Cavs, you could at least package him as like the headliner to get a player who was not a number one pick whenever we redrafted his draft, but this
yeah,
is where we're at. And it's kind of like the knock you would have against Hornacek as a number one overall pick in the abstract is that he was never like the guy for a good team, but also like who on this board was.
right. And that's the thing. It's like it. I mean, I started out with a list for the Cavs. I kid you not, of 14 guys to just kind of put it to. Um,
Wow.
and some of them were quicker eliminations because like we talked about like Rodman and stuff. Well, defensively they're pretty good. I don't really think that he would have brought much to him. Um, I know that I think in this season too they had a new coach because I believe George Karl was fired this year during
Yeah,
this
that sounds
prior
right.
season, and then they brought in Lenny Wilkins after that, if I remember correctly. But it's yeah, I mean it's like there's no flashy picks. I didn't feel like he is a one-time All Star, so not as many All Stars as some of the other things, but statistically, I think, and we're seeing this maybe more now in the modern NBA stuff too. Like you have to fill your roster out. Like the days of
Yeah.
one guy winning you a championship, or and maybe they were never really there. I mean, that's how you
And
had
even
guys like Kerr step up for the Bulls, and
and even if those guys, even if that was going on in that era, none of the guys in this draft are going to fill that. So you might as well
correct.
take guys who can be the supporting cast. It's not like you're saying, "Oh, I'm going to take Jeff Hornacek to be my, second or third best player," instead of taking Jordan. Like you're taking him
Yeah,
over some other guys who are a similar type.
yeah, and this is purely, there's some other guys like, and the funny thing is, I think the top three I settled on for the Cavs, um, were the three guys you alluded to, other than Hornacek. Um, the three guys that they actually ended up with from this draft, um,
Doherty, Harper, and Price.
and Price, um,
Yeah.
you know, in some order. But to me, it's just a boring safe pick. And frankly, like had we determined this a week ago, I might have delved deeper and come up with a different answer. But in my extremely limited research, that's what I went with. But never forget, in our first NBA redraft, I'm also the dude that took Plumlee as like his first rounder. So I just like safe high vort picks, I guess, up high.
The, Look, at the point you were at in that draft, there was no correct pick for you. I wouldn't hang your head about that one. All right, so
All right,
I'm on the
numero
board next.
dos.
I am the Boston Celtics, which is a pretty interesting position to be in because, like I said, they were the best team in the NBA the season before. Uh, really gave some consideration to drafting a big man because even though they were stacked with big men, they were getting a little bit older. But at that point, it kind of felt like that would be like almost like the Pistons taking Darko kind of thing, where you're just burying him on your bench. Because they also had Bill Walton at that point, so
Oh yeah.
you have like four Hall of Famers as your big man rotation. So looked more towards guards, and let's be honest, the Boston Celtics are Look, I'm not saying that the fans for the Celtics won't embrace a black player, but boy, do they like to embrace a white guy. So I'm taking Mark Price.
Mark Price, yeah. Price
So
was my number 2 dude on the Cavs board.
yeah,
So
yeah, I think with Price, and he's honestly not going to start for this team because you still have Danny Ainge, you still have Dennis Johnson, but Johnson's getting rapidly aging.
up
So
there in age. Yeah.
yeah, I think Price would be ready to take over and would certainly be ready to be a sixth man. Fairly early on, he can take charge of the offense in ways that like Scott Wedman or whoever's not going to be able to. And this
Yeah.
was a guy who was just a lights out 3-point shooter. I was a 4-time All Star. Made a first team All NBA, 3-time third team, got MVP votes on 4 different occasions. Not necessarily like, an all purpose superstar. Like we just said about Hornacek, none of these guys are going to be like the franchise guy, but, especially on a team, and, it'd be interesting to take the team that already has Larry Bird, who was kind of a like ahead of his time 3-point shooter. You get a guy that's even like a more extreme version of that coming off the bench. I think it would be he could fulfill a role, similar to the role that like James Harden filled on those like Oklahoma City Thunder teams when he was coming off the bench. Not that I think there's a world where Mark Price turns into as like fully formed of a player as James Harden ever became, but just in that time frame, and he's somebody who would add sort of an extra level of excitement to that team, which was already a plenty exciting team, but just add one more weapon to the arsenal, and anyone that's picked here is going to feel like an embarrassment of riches. So
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, I think Price is, when you look at it, if that's how it broke down, it's probably what I would have done just with my limited knowledge in terms of them. But it's funny that, I don't know, from I guess perspective of um, you know flashiness of our top 2 picks. Boy, could they be more boring and vanilla. And no, that's not just because they're both white. Um,
yeah, I mean they're both good players. I wouldn't even say that they're boring players because I find top notch 3-point shooting to be interesting. But I could
for
certainly
sure.
understand that, like, you're not getting a guy who's like a transcendent athlete with these spots. Not
Right.
to do the whole patronizing, oh, the white guy is not athletic thing, because like obviously they're NBA players, but you're not exactly looking at like the absolute like high level like physical freak type guys. You're looking at guys who are athletic enough, but mostly they're just like really good shooters.
No, I think that's
Right.
a good
So
point.
you're up next for the Golden State Warriors.
Warriors.
And I'm going to be
Eh,
honest, I have no idea who's on the Warriors at this point in time. So you could be
Yeah.
sealing my next guy up. You could be.
Well,
I have no idea.
yeah. Here's the this is the easiest pick in the world. Because let me tell you that I'm just going to go to one team stat for them. Rebounding. They finished last in the league in rebounding and second or third to last in rebounds allowed per game.
Okay. Were there any good
Uh,
rebounders available in this draft?
oh, did I also mention that they're giving up the highest? Or no, and they were already get. It's weird. They couldn't rebound, but they were very good defensively. Gave up like the fewest points a game while scoring the fewest also. But yeah, the rebounding and some defensive shoring up. I'm going with the worm, Dennis Rodman, at 3. A man who, compared to anyone in this draft, has more than double the rebounds, has almost 12,000 rebounds in his career. The next highest is like 5,200, and that was Brad Doherty.
Yeah.
um, I mean, how much time you got? We can talk the accolades. Obviously, Hall of Famer, 2-time All Star, 5-time NBA champ, 8-time All Defensive Team. I think 7 of those were first team. Um, Rebounding champ 7 times, 2-time All NBA, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. The dude is eccentric, we'll say, to be polite.
Yeah.
But man, was he good at what he did. which was
Yeah,
rebound, defend, and get in your head.
yeah, and the famous story about Rodman is that I mentioned the Madonna thing before, but the story is that Madonna, who obviously knows a thing or two about how to like manipulate the public and how to like get attention, was basically like telling Dennis Rodman, like, hey, yeah, you're this like good kind of does all the small things basketball player, but you have to be a little crazy, you have to be a little flamboyant if you want to have people paying attention to you. And he became like legitimately a star in terms of like how popular he was with the Bulls. And if you look at his numbers with the Bulls compared to his numbers with the Pistons, it's not even close. He was a much better player with Detroit.
Yeah,
And that's where he got his defensive players of the year. And if you look at his stats, like while he was not a great offensive player, he actually like wasn't bad as far as like his offensive efficiency. Like he,
yeah,
this is seems like faint praise, but he shot 52% from the field for his career. He wasn't exactly attempting high difficulty shots, but it's
right.
also to have a guy who kind of knows his role and understands that his offensive role is primarily going to be like putbacks on your rebounds, which he's going to get plenty of, is a pretty good thing to
Yeah,
have.
yeah. I mean, the guy averaged almost 5 offensive rebounds a game. Like that seems like a crazy high number to me. Like, you
It
know,
is that is correct.
and not, saying,
Yeah,
um, but yeah, I mean, he's like you said, for a team that can't rebound, like if you can get, perhaps arguably the greatest rebounder of all time, if not, he's certainly in the conversation for it. You
yeah.
sure that up real quick, and the Warriors were a pretty boring team around this time, and they stayed boring for another 30 years or so. But
Well, they did have a rookie Chris Mullen on that team who was much more of a
yeah,
scorer than Rodman, and I actually kind of like the idea of the two of them playing with each other,
that could be
as
interesting.
forwards because one guy can kind of do the offensive heavy lifting and one guy can do it defensively, and especially if you and obviously with these picks it kind of changes the team's fortunes, how well they do, who they're able to draft later on. But like the
Yeah,
Warriors had a little bit of a run in the early '90s with like Tim Hardaway and Mitch Richmond. If
that's
you
right.
could throw Rodman into that mix along with Mullen, then having a defensive first player with those much more dynamic offensive players, you could have something there.
Yeah, I mean, oof, yeah. You look at the rest of this roster. Here's the roster in 86, 87. Greg Ballard, Joe Barry Carroll, Sleepy Floyd, Kevin Henderson, Rod Higgins, Ben McDonald, Perry Moss, Chris Mullen, Purvis Short, Clinton Smith, Larry Smith, Terry Teagle, Chris Washburn, and Jerome Whitehead.
Yeah, by taking Dennis Rodman, it means you don't get Chris Washburn, I suppose. But
Yeah,
you're just gonna have to live
I,
with that, I
yeah.
suppose.
Oh darn, I guess. Which, to be fair, they went 42 and 40 and finished over 500 that season. So
Hmm.
with Rodman,
Maybe turn.
it would have been very because it appears that their coach was George Karl.
Huh.
Hey, they got rid of Johnny, is it Bach Batch, from the season before.
I have no idea.
I have no idea either. I've never heard of him, but I know who George Karl was. So he left Cleveland and went to Golden State and improved them
Yeah.
significantly. So
All right. Yeah. Good pick. So I am now picking on behalf of the Indiana Pacers. Pacers
boy, were
actually
they
had
bad
like
the season before this.
yeah, they were 26 and 56, not great. Did end up bouncing up to 41 and 41 the next year though, so
Yeah,
they have that going for them. This was a team that actually was starting to build some interesting pieces. They had my dear uncle Vern Fleming taking over at the point, playing pretty well. They had a few big men, Steve Stepanovich, Mizou, all that
yeah,
stuff. Wayman Tisdale, Clark Kellogg, not necessarily guys who are like, going to be franchise cornerstones, but like good big men. So at this
yeah.
point, I really kind of, I mean, honestly, the guy that I really want is like Reggie Miller, but I would have to wait a year for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of looking towards like the wings, and like honestly, obviously I can't take him, but Jeff Hornacek would be the perfect fit here. Like it
Yeah.
would be exactly. It would also fit the whole Pacers going for white guys thing. Just gonna
Yeah.
keep that trend going, but with that not being available, I am going to I'll go with Ron Harper,
Sure.
who you know maybe not quite as like high end of an offensive player as I necessarily would envision in this role, but was a guy who did score and got 13.8 per game for his career. I tend to think of him as being the point guard on those Bulls teams in the late '90s, but his actual prime was as a shooting guard for the Cavs, and he was a guy who could play strong defensively. In The Last Dance, famously Michael Jordan kind of just like making fun of the fact that the Cavs put Craig Elo on him rather than putting Ron Harper on him. I think he kind of remembered that when it came to acquiring Ron Harper. But you have a player who's like a good, two-way kind of guard. A guy who, not a great shooter. 29% looks like from three for his career, but kind of a well-rounded game. Was never an all-star. Was kind of more of like a role-playing type, but there's not necessarily anybody here that I'm necessarily like clamoring over. The guy they drafted in this spot in reality was Chuck Person. Gave at least some thought to, but I think that Harper at his peak was just better than Chuck Person.
Agreed.
Um, Gave at least some thought to Petrovic, but it feels like it's kind of cheating the system a little bit to just like project forward like what I think he could have been too much.
Or
But yeah, I think Harper's kind of. I'm not even sure if it's necessarily the right pick, but I think it's a safe pick, and I think it's like a pick that I'm not gonna have a hard time defending. So
yeah. No,
yeah,
certainly
let's go
not.
with Ron.
Yeah, Ron Harper, like you said, nothing crazy. Won a lot of championships with Chicago, so there's that.
I do. I do think it's very interesting that he was the number 8 overall pick out of Miami University, which I'm not sure how big of a deal he was in college because that's probably about where Wally Zerbiak got picked. And Wally Zerbiak was like kind of like a tournament sensation at Miami. I'm just wondering if like Ron Harper had that kind of like Steph Curry is like maybe the ultimate example of one of these guys who even though he went to a small college, everybody knew who he was coming out because like he just like took over for this, I would say mid major, but honestly probably a little below that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, kind of interesting too, though. U4 with Chuck Person, who did win the Rookie of the Year that year for Indiana,
Yeah,
for the only
that
other guy
shocked
that
me.
for the only other guy who received votes, which was Ron Harper.
It shocked me that Chuck
Yeah,
Person won Rookie of the Year, and then I looked at the trajectory of his career, and it kind of made a little more sense. And honestly,
yeah,
like if the Pacers had been like one guy away, I might have even just gone with Person, but like, okay, well, I'll take the kind of short term gains here. But this was a team that needed a little bit more help, and because Harper demonstrated that he could play the point guard, even if they're able to snag Reggie Miller next year, like you can still make that work. Have Ron Harper play the point, or have him be like a really strong combo guard, coming off the bench, something like that. I think there's going to be a role for him regardless.
yeah. No, I agree with that.
All right, what team do we have up next? We have
All right.
the
The New York Knickerbockers.
New York Knicks. Yes.
So I do need to retract. Before I go to this, I was looking up the wrong thing. The Knicks were actually the terrible rebounding team, but the Warriors giving up the most points and the best field goal percentage. That's why I had Rodman at the top for them. Rodman was also at the top for the Knicks, but knowing he was at the top of the other one, it really didn't matter.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fair. And I mean, I would actually, and I'm not sure who you're going to pick here, but the Knicks are also coming off having rookie Patrick Ewing, so
yeah,
they have somebody who is eventually going to be a pretty solid rebounder and overall defender in his own regard.
correct. And it's which it's funny because it would have made Doherty a really interesting pick for them if
Yep.
you didn't have Ewing waiting in the wings. Kind of a where those are two very obvious guys that would play the 5 that I think you could get better value, I guess, here. Um, Weird how many like decent like big men there are in um, this draft in
I
general,
mean,
but
it's very
sorry,
much
go
a
ahead.
big men era.
Yeah, true. And but ultimately with the Knicks, I was like you considered Petrovic, but it just seems like it. If we're really doing what we know now, it doesn't seem like I could necessarily go that route. So oddly enough, I think the one that fits the mold best here is the guy that you decided not to make the real pick. I'm going to take Chuck Person as the next one.
Huh?
I think his kind of combo. He's kind of a combo guy who could play the 3 and the 4. Definitely an undersized played it, but um, does have that rookie of the year under his belt. You know, I mean, and a guy, if you look at his points per game, it tails off a little bit or quite a bit in the last 5, 6 years of his career, including and there was one season that he missed entirely um, due to a back injury. But to start his career, I mean, averaged 18-8, 17, 21-6, 19-7, 18-4, 18-5 a game to start his career. You telling me that playing with Patrick Ewing, that's only going to draw more attention away to give him more opportunities? I think that could have worked out. Um, and then I think by total rebounds, he's had the third most rebounds of anyone in this draft. So he could, one of those guys that while undersized, crashed the glass and played that style a little bit. And I think just overall, that was what made the most sense here. I
Yeah,
really think
this would have
Doherty
been
would have been the easiest one, but
yeah, this would have been before the Knicks started acquiring like Charles Oakley. Like I'm sure he was with the Bulls at this point. But, like started acquiring like other big guys to supplement Ewing.
yeah.
Like I know Chuck Person's not like a big guy in like the 7-footer kind of realm, but there's a difference between him and you know if you drafted like Nate McMillan or somebody like that. Like there's
Yeah.
there's a difference there. Yeah. Seems like a reasonable call. I'm sure Knicks fans won't get mad and start booing, though I think this was before the draft was always at MSG, so
It says the
give
86
that
draft
going.
was in New York, so
Huh. Okay.
I don't know if it was at MSG, but
Yeah, they used to have it at what was that place called like the Belt Forum maybe? Like it's like the
could be.
theater that's next to MSG.
Oh, okay.
And like
Yeah.
now and like now they have it at Barclays, which is
Right.
just kind of interesting that they, not that Brooklyn's like, the death of civilization or anything, but they move it away from like the absolute like hustle and bustle. But
Oh, yeah, 100%.
all right. So number 6, I am the Phoenix Suns. Um, yeah, this is also not a very good team, but they have a couple young guys who are starting to kind of make some moves. I think this was the year before. Larry Nance was a big kind of breakout player. He was a kind of more of a power forward type. Jay Humphreys was their point guard. Again, if there was like Stockton available or something, I'm not gonna care that much about positional need. But I think this is the time for Brad Doherty. The Suns had James Edwards, who was decent, but at this point was, let me see how old he was. He was probably in his 30s. He was 30. So get more of a young big man who can kind of help take over. And we're building this Phoenix Suns team, around two big guys, Doherty and Nance in the middle, and these are guys who they were teammates, right? Because Doherty, yeah, they were, because it wasn't too long after this that Larry Nance got traded to Cleveland. And,
Yeah.
we saw these guys work together in the past, so let's see them work together in our new future.
There you go.
I think that the notes that I had at center were really, it was really just like I was gonna probably grab him or Sabonis, and I'm glad that I can get the number one overall pick and like a perfectly good number one overall pick. Uh,
Yeah,
at number 6.
yeah. No, I think give Brad Doherty credit for having like maybe the most one of the more notable like after basketball careers that doesn't have much to do with basketball. I believe he does still do from some stuff for like CBS for college basketball. In his NASCAR off season, if you will. Um,
Yeah, he's just like an all-purpose commentator. Just throw him on whatever sport. And like I know that he owned I know that he owned an auto team, but it is just a little bit strange that they're basically just like, hey, there's this basketball guy that we know is into racing, so we're gonna bring him on as an analyst. But
yeah, I mean, it's just to see a 7 foot guy who's like into auto racing, just stock car drivers, not usually large men. So obviously, I'm sure
yeah,
he's driven some because guys that are on that, I'm sure, drive a lot.
like,
But
probably has a driver's license. Yeah, I don't know for sure, I guess, but
I got my drive. Anyway,
I'm sure he's a big Rodrigo head.
I
That's
mean, he. I don't judge, man.
But anyway, Brad Doherty, yeah, grew up in North Carolina, attended UNC. You're gonna find some NASCAR fans down there, and I
It's
remember there was this. I remember one time I want to say it was Ralph Wiley, but it was like some older ESPN guy, like 20 years ago, was like reminiscing about how he had interviewed Brad Doherty when he was coming out of college, and he was asking him like who his favorite athlete was, and he was expecting him to say like a basketball player, maybe you say Jordan, maybe you want to go like more the big man route, so you say Kareem, and he just says Richard Petty, and he's just like, what? Like,
I
okay,
mean,
I guess.
I could say, I've had the good fortune of one of the few NASCAR tracks I've been to is actually Charlotte Motor Speedway in North Carolina, and maybe it's because I got VIP open bar treatment while I was there, but watched some local races on the quarter mile track there. It's pretty sweet. I ain't gonna lie to you. So, and I've been to a few NASCAR races. They are, people talk about hockey being a sport that's way more fun in person than watching on TV. I can't even begin to tell you how much more fun like NASCAR is at the races.
For some reason, me bringing up Richard Petty has made me start thinking about that one sandwich he tweeted about that one time. Do you know what reference I'm making?
I have no idea.
Okay, I'm gonna have to find this for you while you're making your next pick because I don't even want to do it any sort of
So,
injustice.
so for this part, are we saying that I'm officially getting the seventh pick as Cleveland? Is that how we're doing this, or do you get to pick next
I'm picking
again?
next. Sorry, I will look it up, but yeah, I'll pick next. My bad. Okay, so uh, I am the Dallas Mavericks now, and this is a team that they ended up drafting Roy Tarpley here, which is kind of an interesting pick, just because like he actually was pretty good for a few years, but just had a lot of substance issues. He's kind of lumped in with Washburn and Bias, though he had a much more productive pro career long. But I think knowing what we know now, they could really have used like more of a guard at that point. They had Derek Harper, who is like pretty good, but they were really kind of like looking for another guard at that point. Probably didn't see anybody on the board that really like spoke to them. But knowing what we know now, I'll take Nate McMillan. It was a solid point guard. He's nicknamed Mr. Sonic, which is not a thing that I actually knew prior to today, but speaks for his ability to resonate with a fan base. Just a not a high volume scorer, averaged less than 6 points per game for his career, which is somehow fewer points than Dennis Rodman, but a guy who was a good distributor, you know, better suited as a point guard, but could play a little shooting guard if he had to, and a guy that went on to a coaching career for a reason, just somebody who He was a really like solid leader. Like ironically, he's kind of would be the perfect player to add to this team if you also got to keep Roy Tarpley, but
Yeah.
obviously I don't get to do that. But yeah, Nate McMillan it is.
Yeah. I mean, get you some steals. Um, which like it was actually crazy to me. I was looking when I was looking at the team statistics, like how many more steals I feel like there were per game at this time. Um,
I just believe that everyone was just bad, and therefore it was easy. It's like
yeah.
how Anthony Edwards is like in some hot water because he said on a podcast that Michael Jordan was the only skilled player in that era. It's like,
Yeah.
come on, like that actually is the
It,
thing that drives me nuts about like basketball culture is people who feel like they have to like it goes so over the top and like I generally agree that players get better over time, but like
sure.
the idea that like guys who were all stars in the '80s like couldn't play in the G League today, like let's settle down.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I always find this funny, but like you'll hear the occasional baseball person like talking about like, you know, Babe Ruth, how many home runs would he have if he played today? Well, I mean, they're the old football guys where it's like, yeah, they weren't paid $1 million. These guys barely made any money, had to work other jobs, but they just beat the crap out of each other on a football field. I mean, it's the progression of how professional sports is. I mean, I think it's a weird thing that people get caught up on and all that. But that's a Nate McMillan is I think like anything as we even start to get to this point, it's like perfectly adequate, fine pick. Um,
It's weird that there are multiple Hall of Famers still available, and that's the route that I went. But I think the Petrovic thing is really complicated when it comes to Sabonis. It's not about so much like not having potential, but just the fact that he didn't come to the NBA for another decade. So it's just you're waiting a really long time.
oh, good lord! I sorry.
Okay, so Jason
I
just checked his phone, and I know that
holy,
I sent him the Richard Petty. Would you like to read the tweet and or describe the tweet?
I'll do my best. The king shared his favorite sandwich with us: mayonnaise, and black pepper. Has anyone else tried this interesting combination?
Okay, for anyone who's listening, obviously this is an audio medium,
What
but
on
you can
earth?
find this. It's at the Richard Petty. So he has, I would say, for what the sandwich is describing, probably an appropriate amount of mayonnaise. Like
Sure.
it's maybe more than I would put on a mayonnaise. It has like more than I'd have on like a sandwich with more ingredients, but it's not that many
That,
ingredients. It's fine, whatever. I can't. However much pepper you're imagining is on this sandwich, I can't even
it's
begin to describe how. And
like
like I'm somebody who like puts too much salt and pepper on things, so I'm not like gonna get too snobbish about it. But like, come, this entire thing is like
that's got to
basically
be a package of pepper on there.
like
Like,
imagine if he had put a slice like two slices of ham on each of pieces of white bread. Like as much ham as would be on that sandwich is how much pepper is on this. It is
oh
an
my god.
abomination. It looks so bad.
Like I don't. There's no way to defend this.
Yes. So sometimes I try to um like whenever people like complain about like food combinations, especially if it's ones they haven't actually had, I'll just be like, look, I like these ingredients, like, white bread, mayonnaise, pepper. I don't think I love any of those things, but I like all of them just fine. And they all can be components of a nice sandwich.
And
But
here's the
dear
thing,
God.
and I could see this being like a thing in the South for like a family that maybe didn't have a ton of money and just throw some mayonnaise on bread and a little bit of black pepper or something. Like, does it sound the most appetizing thing? But no, like, but have I definitely just ate like buttered bread before? Like even like white bread?
Yeah,
Sure. It's
sure.
not that much different.
Toasted,
It's
but
the
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but it's the amount of black pepper on this
yeah,
sandwich
it's if
that
he had
just
put like a
makes it.
light amount of if you put a light amount of black pepper on it, I'd be like, on, man, you're like rich. You can do better than this. But also, like his dad's a NASCAR Hall of Famer too. There's no way he was this poor growing up.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably fair. It's my goodness. I'm not gonna be able to sleep
All right.
tonight now.
Yeah. Well, before you try to figure out how to sleep tonight, you have one more pick to make to
I do have one
supplement
pick.
with Jeff Hornacek on the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah. So I was almost able to get Brad Doherty still, but you had to take him from me. I think that the big man route is a good route for them to go, so I'll take Sabonis at 8.
Yeah.
Um,
And I will say that I think I don't think that by taking Sabonis you're necessarily locking in that you're not going to get him for another decade. I think he theoretically could come over earlier. It'll just be a little more of a challenge.
yeah, I mean that was the thing with him because yeah, he only played 7 years or something like that, 7, 8 years, I think, right?
And he didn't start his NBA career until he was in his 30s.
Yeah, he was a guy who stayed overseas, and
Yeah.
you know,
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he was in the Olympics in '92.
I think you're right. That sounds right.
I believe he and Petrovic both were. It was like kind of, and like the two of them and Kukoc were the like premier non-American players in that tournament, which
Oh yeah,
obviously there's a reason that the Dream Team won by such margins. Is because like
yeah,
Leitner as a college student was probably one of the 15 best players in the tournament, and he was by far the worst player on his own team.
yeah. It's it's an interesting thing that like now these guys when they play overseas they don't stay over there like this like they you know anymore. I feel like there's more diligence that hey we're going to take you and you're going to come over kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But
Well, at this point, Sabonis would have been because he was in the former USSR, right? Because he would have been in Lithuania.
he is Lithuania. Yeah,
Okay. So in drafting in 1986, you're like you don't have that many expectations of what you're going to be able to like when you're going to be able to bring these guys over. This is a time where like
yeah,
top players from the Soviet Union in hockey were like generally going in later rounds as just kind of like flyers
yeah.
for the
Maybe we can
future.
get him to come over, right? But I mean, he was a first rounder. I mean,
Was he
I believe so.
24th? I don't remember if they were
Oh,
23 or 24 teams at that point.
uh, they have him as the last pick of the first round here on Basketball Reference. But
Yeah, it was an interesting. You know, not literal lottery pick, but interesting kind of choice.
yeah,
There's a few interesting guys who were left on the board. Like nobody that I would consider like a slam dunk like star level player. I mean Petrovic, obviously, really good pro player, was a all NBA player before his death. Len
sure.
Bias, maybe. I almost want to be like kind of like what happens if some other team drafts Len Bias, but like based on the circumstance of how quickly after he got drafted that he passed away,
Yeah,
I don't think it would have probably made much of a difference. Like maybe if Washington had drafted him, he would have been nearby. I don't know, but
yeah.
regardless, though, like not. And you have like Del Curry, who is not as good as Steph, but was still a very good shooter in his own right.
Let's say he's
Um,
no Seth, but
John Sally, a classic vibes guy.
you mean former host of the best damn sports show period,
God, that
Ron
show was
Sally?
so good.
Ah, I miss it.
There was like a 20-year retrospective on it the other day, and it's like, and like he was just so much like fun to like. And it was kind of weird because like I feel like he was actually the guy that had the most balance because you would have a few guys on that show that were like a little bit too serious, and then you would have guys like Tom Arnold who were just purely literally comedians. Like they're just there to kind of joke around and goof off. And I think Sally had like the best kind of combination because
He brought
DeMarco
some
Farr was on there
levity.
for a while too, wasn't he?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, but yeah, he was it's funny. And for anybody who doesn't remember the show, A, look it up. B, it's basically a lot of like what you just see now with like athletes who are like former athletes who have like podcasts and you just watch their clips on TikTok. Like,
Yeah, it really was like honestly there was kind of like a sports talk show kind of element to it. It was just on video
yeah,
because they produced like basically 3-hour episodes every day.
yeah, it's like they
It
just
was
talk
a
about the
little
news for the most part. Like,
yeah, it
it
was
was,
basically like how like First Take would be if First Take didn't take itself so seriously. Like if it weren't just like I actually think Stephen A. Smith was on that show for like he would occasionally come in for like segments before
oh,
ESPN picked him up. But he was like more of like a straight news reporter at that point rather than maybe like a columnist and not
yeah,
like the kind of cartoon character he became.
get them dollars, Stephen A. Get them dollars, bro.
He is dude is so rich.
It's yeah, I
That would he is like that would be such a cool life to live. I think that he would probably be the most fun person to be in sports media. The least fun being Shams Charania because he is like on his phone like literally like 20 hours a day. Like he
yeah,
sleeps in like very short bursts because he has to constantly be checking things. He doesn't drive or take public transportation because he can't risk not being fully available all the time. So he has to take taxis everywhere because he's just always on his phone. It sounds awful.
yeah. That seems like a little too dedicated to me.
Yeah, like all millennials and younger, I spend too much time on my phone. But like he has achieved levels that are just excruciating to even consider.
Yeah, it's a like I've known people in media and journalism and all that kind of stuff, and I'm just like, in today's age, it's so different than it's like when we were growing up. Even I feel like I could tell you who like most of the guys or gals that hosted Sports Center, all the anchors were. I turn on ESPN now, I'm like, I don't know who that is. And they
Yeah,
fired RG3, so I mean, I'm like, what am I doing now?
they have to just give more money to the hot take artists.
I cannot wait to see who. I don't know. Do we know who's calling the Mizzou Murray State game tomorrow? But I'm sure it's going to be
Not a clue.
a high end crew.
Yeah, obviously. All right, we have our we've gotten through the lottery. Would you like me to recap the picks?
Let's do it.
Rather than picking our like personal teams, let's just go through the teams that drafted. So the Cleveland Cavaliers select Jeff Hornacek, Boston Celtics select Mark Price, Golden State Warriors select Dennis Rodman, Indiana Pacers select Ron Harper, New York Knicks select Chuck Person, Phoenix Suns select Brad Doherty, Dallas Mavericks select Nate McMillan, and the Cleveland Cavaliers pick Arvydas Sabonis.
What a draft.
Yeah, I. So this is a stat that I couldn't believe. Do you know what player in this draft played the most games in the NBA? Not a player we drafted. I'll tell you that.
Um,
He's also tied for most seasons.
trying to think. It's not like it's not Johnny Newman, is it?
It is Johnny Newman.
Good night. Are you serious?
Yeah, he just hung around like that is a guy with a like career statistical record that makes you think that guy is probably just a really nice guy. Because that guy just it's like whenever we're looking at Kevin Willis's stats whenever we did 84,
Yeah.
it's like guy played for 21 years, huh? And he was like he had like a few good years, but like mostly just kind of yeah, probably a real cool guy.
So the guy played 1,159 games and has a career VORP of 2.9. Like,
Well, unlike Kevin Willis, it's at least in the positives.
I mean, that's fair. He does have a negative box plus minus, but
Yeah, well, so does Chuck Person. It happens.
yeah, I guess that's true. But no, I think this was a this is an interesting, fun experiment. Let us know if you guys enjoyed us doing this little twist, or if you have any other random twists or drafts that you'd like us to do, so we can have those planned out better in advance and not be as
Yeah.
off the ball as it could. But speaking of letting us know, John, where can the people find you?
People can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, etc. JohnJF125, STLBullpen.com. Also, so second place whenever we did the poll for our listener's choice of a draft was the fast food draft. Let us know if you think that Richard Petty's pepper sandwich should be eligible to be drafted.
I mean, do we need to? Oh my gosh, John, did we just come up with our next episode? Do we do the sandwich draft in honor of the Richard Petty sandwich?
Then we're going to get into hot dog discourse. It's going to be a whole thing.
I don't think there's discourse. We both think it's a sandwich. It's not a big deal.
No, I think it's a sandwich, but other people are very angry about it.
I mean, but here's the thing. I don't know if a hot dog makes, depending on how many we draft, I don't know if a hot dog makes a sandwich list.
That's true. It's like when people do the Die Hard as a Christmas movie thing. It's like, yeah, probably, but I don't think it's the best Christmas movie. There's better movies. I don't know.
I mean, it's, it's, now you're gonna make some people mad with that take. Like, I've finally come around after being a person who very much said it's not. But maybe we'll draft Christmas movies later too.
I'm gonna go full Bill Simmons and claim that Home Alone isn't a Christmas movie.
I mean, it's more of a psychological thriller, I think. So,
Yeah.
or at least we get to
It's
watch
also
this.
Gerald Ford's favorite movie, as we learned last episode.
It sure is Gerald Ford's favorite movie.
All right, where can people find you, and where can people find the podcast?
You can find me on Twitter at DraftDayDadShaw with my, I think I'm down to like 0.6 tweets a week now. So you see one, hold on to that. You can find the podcast at Draft Day Pod on Twitter. Uh, Feel free to give us a follow over there. You can find the this podcast obviously anywhere you find podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I think Google Podcasts as well.
I think Google Podcast, like, it's now YouTube something or another. It's available there though too, so whatever.
Okay. Yeah, wherever you listen to your podcasts, if you wouldn't mind giving us a nice review on there, some kind words on those places, we'd appreciate that as well. We're not above begging or standing for people to like our stuff. So, but
Certainly are
with that
not.
said, yeah. But with that, I guess everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, everybody.